Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma Thayer and Tom Breeze. Episode 9, Christmas Special 2021.
Ah, those jingly bells. Don't we love them on that all too familiar podcast jingle?
Yeah, sorry, Cameron. Had to be done.
And it only means one thing. It is the Christmas episode.
It is.
And it's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve when you get this, as we say every year, not Christmas Eve when we're recording it.
No.
Because that would be sad, wouldn't it?
And you might detect that Tom is an incubus of lurg.
Yeah. Forget COVID. Man flu is the real deal. Man flu is where the real suffering's at, people.
So I think you finished your throat lozenge.
Yes, I have. Hence why I've gone down about half an octave, hopefully.
You've done the listeners that courtesy,
Yes.
so we can't hear a lozenge working its way around your mouth. And obviously, a Christmas episode usually means it's a little bit more free and loose. We've got a bit of a tradition. I think one year we decided we were going to do the 12 days of Christmas, which sounded really great when we were in that enthusiastic phase.
2 hours later, we were still recording. But 12 is the number that's stuck, hasn't it? We've both brought 6 things each, so that we did 12 things. So apologies, listeners. This one's going to last for pretty much the whole of your Christmas dinner cooking time.
Just do it in bits.
Yes.
Do it in bits. Stick the sprouts on last, and maybe get the turkey in now, or your nut roast of choice. So anyway, I'm going to stop waffling, and I'm going to hand over to Tom, because Tom's going to kick off with something that isn't too festive, I hear.
Well, no, I mean, I usually end up with something a little bit less light towards the start of mine, but I have got a couple. I never can quite work out, is it because I'm just, tired, and that's kind of changing the way I approach bringing so-called light things to the podcast, or is it because I think that some people like to have something to chew on during their downtime? I don't know. But anyway, I've got a couple of chewy ones as part of my 6. I hope I've got some light ones as well. But this is most definitely a chewy one. And this one is related to that thing that I tend to go on about, the idea that we have to be very, very careful, that we don't always just read people that write things that we 100% agree with. And there's been so much lately in the news about, culture wars and echo chambers and nobody listening to anybody. And so, universities have been quite a big part of that as well. They've been a central part of all of that. So I'm going to set a little bit of an example. I've picked something that is really quite pokey, but I do think it's interestingly argued. And I mean, that I like to read right across the piece of opinion pieces. Mm-hmm. I do think that's a thing that everybody should do. So I have got a very provocative article here from The Spectator, which is a sort of rightwards leaning weekly news magazine. And it's by the author Lionel Shriver, who tends to fairly fearlessly put some arguments that are quite difficult. But I think, even though I wouldn't say that I agreed with absolutely everything she said, I think they're points worth making. So I'm going to make them. Sorry.
Do it.
I'm going to do that on Lionel Shriver's behalf. I'm going to read, edited down with apologies for time purposes, her article. The headline is "The Vanity of White Guilt." And it deals with, I guess, the fact that everybody is trying to navigate their way around the questions of how we do something about the kind of systematic biases that exist in various setups, in the world, and that we have to be a little bit careful that we don't do things that are tokenistic, that are self-indulgent, that are more about us than about the people that we're trying to be allies to. So although she goes at it here quite hard, I think there are some points that are well worth considering. So here she goes. When I was about 10, on return home from church, I ate a peach, the juice of which dribbled down my new pink frock. I scuttled to my room to change, bunching the dress under the bed. I emerged the picture of innocence, but I felt guilty. For weeks, the garment pulsed with accusation. Going to sleep, I always knew it was there. Sure enough, my mother discovered the wad while vacuuming, and she was furious. She could have scrubbed out the juice had I told her about it right away. To this day, I'm mindful that you can only expunge stains while they're still fresh, and somewhere in there lurks a metaphor. I'm not prone to remembering the ingestion of individual pieces of fruit. That small memory looms as a touchstone for the experience of culpability. I'd not acted responsibly, and I'd compounded my malfeasance with concealment. When called out, I hung my head with nothing to say for myself. The last thing I inclined to do was to tear out and advertise to the whole neighbourhood that I'd been a bad little girl. Though the concept of collective white guilt has been with us since at least the 1960s, it's seen quite the fashionable resurgence as universities, businesses and celebrities fall all over themselves to banner their racial blameworthiness. Pale-faced mea culpas gather into a deafening chorus. Clarion declarations of moral dereliction do not have the texture of guilt. They're prideful. They have the texture of preening. Elaborate racial apologies are a form of showing off. We're witnessing the spectacle of white people frantically competing with other white people over who can appear more self-excoriating, more self-loathing. But these people don't hate themselves. They hate other people. Mythical other people for the most part. All those terrible racist white folks to whom they can feel vastly superior. Now that white silence equals violence, they can also feel superior to regular going about their business white people who haven't managed to get prostrate pronouncements of self-disgust on BuzzFeed. Proper guilt feels bad. Its emotional cousin shame feels even worse. Shame is soul-destroying, the stuff of suicide. You don't parade shame in public. You're unlikely to leave the house. So none of last month's white protesters was ashamed. Maybe we should enlarge the lens. Frankly, I'm weary of the whole category white people, which throws folks of wildly different backgrounds, from Russians to Jews to Scots, into one big indiscriminate pot. So let's talk about people, full stop. As a species, the horrors to which we've subjected one another, including slavery but a great deal else, are so incomprehensibly dreadful that no one as an individual could conceivably bear the crushing weight of all that torture, mass murder and sadism. If guilt is inherited, then every last one of us should be condemned to Dante's 9 circles of hell. None of us chose the world in which we emerged. We didn't select which awful history soaks the ground at our feet. It's insensible to feel guilty or ashamed about something you didn't do. It's entirely sensible to feel regret, sorrow and abhorrence about the likes of slavery. It's commendable to be informed about the past and to try to understand the nature of its wretchedness, as it's also commendable to strain to leave the world a little better than you found it. But claiming that what happened before you were born is all your fault is not only ridiculous, it's vain. So, I mean, as I said, she goes at it in ways that I wouldn't necessarily agree with every part of it. But I think we've talked about the point that it's very, very easy, isn't it, to go on social media and stick a big black square up and watch the likes rolling in. But it's much harder to actually have an interesting, nuanced conversation about what we can do now to make sure that we do kind of make sure that everybody's got the chance that they deserve, that everybody's, you know, not affected by those systematic biases that exist in the world. And I think the self-indulgence sometimes that we see, you know, it's not actually really helping enormously sometimes. I mean, some people would say it's baby steps. It is baby steps. You know, you've got to start from a position of saying that, you know, that these systematic things are bad and they need dismantling and they need sorting out. But I've always had a bit of a suspicion of the people that kind of do that in a very unnuanced way, say, thank you very much, job done, and wait for the pat on the back, because getting on with it quietly and in context and in a nuanced way is much harder, and probably it doesn't give you that instant gratification. So while Lionel Shriver does tend to give you a bit of a slap in the face when she writes these opinion articles, and as I said, I wouldn't agree with absolutely the whole way that she goes in the argument. Sometimes you do need to read this stuff and just stop yourself and think, well, am I doing this properly? Am I just doing the things that people are going to see and applaud and say, oh, very well done, aren't we doing something good? Or are you really getting down into the sort of depths and dealing with the more difficult, more nuanced things that are much harder to wrap up into a post or a picture or some kind of slogan or meme?
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. And I think it's one of the difficulties of living in such a fast-paced Western world, if I could maybe put it that way, because everybody's so quick to jump on the bandwagon, and there is pressure to be quick to do that. I think we spoke about this maybe a year ago. I think I've lost all sense of time when the Black Lives Matter movement sort of found its place on Instagram in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and it was just so fast, and it was a wave of if you weren't putting up a black square, then you should feel ashamed of yourself. You weren't part of that zeitgeist. Is that the right word? That might be the wrong word. I never know the right words. But anyway, it felt like a moment in time. And if you weren't on the pulse, and if you weren't responding quickly to that, then you weren't. Then you ought to be ashamed of yourself. And the thing that struck me when you were doing all of that is I always get quite nervous and sweaty when
I bring one of my articles.
Yeah, but I think that's the right reaction, because I think what I'm reacting to is, oh gosh, I'm going to have to say something in response to this now, and I can't, because I need to think. I need to think slowly, and I need to think in the company of others who are also thinking, and I need to listen. This is not a quick fix, as you said. This is a slow, progression towards being better people, a better society. And I wonder if that's even possible. I don't know. I don't know whether that's even possible.
No, but it does involve thinking and a little bit less kind of just, as you say, throwing things out there and copying other people, doesn't it? And as I said, I think it's really important to read right across the piece. And I wouldn't agree with absolutely everything. I mean, that was an edited down version. There were bits in there as well, which I've edited out, which went a little bit too far down the line for me. But what I do find is that Lionel Shriver is very, very good at nailing self-indulgence and vanity masquerading as doing the right thing. And I find that very refreshing, and uncomfortable though it is to read her articles. I mean, she tends to write in the right-leaning press, like The Spectator. She's often on the opinion pages of The Times as well. There's always something to take away, even if it is just a check and a stop and am I really thinking about this properly, or am I doing this for the right reasons, or is this kind of massively self-indulgent? And one of my more light things I'm going to bring later on will have a connection with that theme, that am I doing things for the right reason, or am I self-indulgent and vain? So there we go.
And I'm just going to need some time to think about that, I think. I'm not going to say any more on that. Thank you for bringing that to our ears. Okay, so quite a heavy entry from me first as well.
You're competing with me.
Trying not to. As listeners who listen to our podcast regularly will know, we're both fans of podcasts. And one that I stumbled across recently comes from the BBC World Service. It's the story of AIDS. So quite heavy subject matter. And I found it particularly fascinating because it ranges from the kind of the beginnings, the early years of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and looking at stories particularly from America. But it then also has a look at how South Africa became the epicenter of the global HIV/AIDS crisis, and also looks at AIDS denialism from its senior political figures, and how medical practitioners on the ground were trying to counter that narrative, often in ways that were putting themselves in sort of compromising situations with regard to their own safety. I just found it really fascinating because it dealt with a lot of different perspectives, kind of ranges from the world of science to the kind of very human stories on the ground, also protests, the AIDS protests in America and obviously across the globe. So I just found it fascinating, and it kind of led me on a bit of a journey on this theme. It took me to a really excellent documentary on the work of nurses and caregivers in San Francisco General Hospital. There's a documentary made about their work called 5B, because the ward that they built was Ward 5B in 1983. And it was it basically kind of created a model that was rolled out globally, practices that were based in humanity, holistic well-being in a time of really great uncertainty for HIV and AIDS patients and their families. And for those of you who have seen the fantastic It's a Sin by Russell T Davies, which I know has smashed a load of awards, it's received a load of awards, and was just generally a great piece of drama that looks at the real lives of HIV and AIDS sufferers in the UK. So if you're interested and if you want to find out more detail, then you've got a couple of different outlets there to sink your teeth into that I've found particularly fascinating.
The World Service is great, and I'm a little bit young to remember really in detail the time of the real kind of fear around HIV and AIDS. It was I was pretty small, but some of the parallels are really interesting, aren't they? With the present day, the fact that it was seen as a gay man's disease, wasn't it, originally?
It was.
And therefore kind of there was the stigma going on there. So yeah, loads of interesting stuff. I haven't listened to that, but I bet it's really good.
Yeah, and it's just exposes kind of different cultural dimensions. And again, I like it that it's coming from sort of real testimonies of those who were there and experienced it firsthand and survived.
Lovely. Okay. Possibly not much lighter from me, but different, and probably a little bit linked to this idea of just thinking a little bit before you stoke the culture wars. Probably, I think this is from a writer called James Marriott, who writes in the Times. And he's a fantastic writer. He's their sort of podcast and books critic. But he annoyingly, in his byline photo, he looks incredibly young. I mean, he's a ridiculously precocious writer, but very, very good. So I enjoyed this article enough that I'm going to bring it to the podcast, even though perhaps it comes across as potentially in the same sort of ballpark as the last one, but it links to my little thing that I often go on about in these light episodes. I've listened back to a few of them, and I do tend to go on about the likes of Amazon and Facebook and privacy and online kind of things. And there was one, wasn't there, last year where I got you a bit... I get a bit worried because I was going on about Alexa and you had one in your house. And all that
yeah.
Sort of thing.
It's all right. I know how to switch on the red dot now and it can't listen.
Okay. I'll use that if I ever find myself face-to-face with one. So this is linked to that, and I just really enjoyed the article and thought that it was worth having a think about in that downtime between Christmas and New Year, just to kind of, again, set some New Year's resolutions to approach the Twitter sphere with a careful kind of eye. So here we go. This is by James Marriott. It is a terrible thing never to forget. In the great Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges' story, Funes the Memorious, a young man named Ireneo Funes is condemned to remember every moment he's ever lived. His present, his past, his most trivial memories are constantly so rich and so clear to him that his life has become unbearable. I no longer find it possible to read Borges' story without thinking of the internet. Our words and gestures fade in memory. Old photographs are lost, but online, every dumb picture, every unfinished conversation and every idle feud is preserved as perfectly as one of Funes' memories. These things go on existing as vividly, as angrily and as pointlessly as they did when you hit the enter key and closed the Twitter tab in righteous disgust. There is no forgetting, no mercy of slow disappearance. Like Funes, we are condemned to live in the appalling glare of an eternal present. I think this has changed us profoundly. I read last week, and this was published in November, so it's a little bit more than last week now. I read last week of the rediscovery of anti-Semitic messages sent by the cricketer Azeem Rafiq as a teenager. Without the internet, those messages could never have been found. That nasty fragment of the past would have been lost irrevocably. But the internet did not just preserve those messages, I think it changed them too. The immediacy of the internet, the way it preserves stuff, keeps it instantly available, ties it to the same profile you still use now, makes even the distant past belong to the present in a way that would have once seemed incomprehensible. For many of Rafiq's severer critics, there was no difference between the teenager and the man. Online, everything exists equally or at once. In this land of no forgetting, you do not exist moment to moment in possession of that liquid and mutable thing, a human personality. You are instead a kind of archival aggregate of every clever and every fatuous thing you've ever said. Online, we're not so much people as vast, unwieldy filing cabinets waiting to be browsed by our friends or raided by our enemies. It is from here that so much of the fury of the internet derives. No online enemy offends you in this moment only. A scroll through an antagonist's profile will inevitably reveal an almost inexhaustible history of contemptuous ideas and views to hate and to return to regularly. Features like Facebook's On This Day contribute to the atmosphere of chaotic simultaneity. Memories of parties, of funerals, of old lovers arrive without invitation and without reason. The past lurches meaninglessly towards us, as real and vivid as the present. As the academic Victor Meyer-Schönberger writes, for millennia, human beings have lived in a world of forgetting. Behaviour, societal mechanisms and processes and values have incorporated and reflected that fact. Forgetting is a blunt moral instrument, but for centuries it's afforded an invaluable kind of justice. Reputations heal, old fights burn themselves out. Too much memory is paralysing. Only by forgetting is it possible to advance. The culture war is the characteristic war of the internet age because it is a war of endless remembering. The same battles over race and gender fought year after year, the same scandals interminably revived, the same villains somehow always at the centre of it all. Funes was merely condemned never to forget. We are doubly condemned, for we are also condemned never to be forgotten. As Meyer-Schönberger points out, to be preserved forever was the legend the KGB stamped on the files of its political prisoners. It was meant as a kind of curse.
Yes.
Love it.
Yes.
I love that article.
Yes.
Just
Absolutely
so
brilliant.
important, isn't it, to not go and do any of those things when you're scrapping on Twitter. In fact, you shouldn't just scrap on Twitter at all, I don't think. But certainly, there's so much in that. I mean, James Marriott is well worth a read if you are able to access articles from the Times. If you can see his unbelievably young-looking byline photo on there, click and read, because he will always come up with an absolute gem.
It just makes me think about how much it undermines change, the kind of artifacts, this filing cabinet, this archive of our, old identities that, I was vegan once. And, there's a big period of my life on Facebook where I really did feel very strongly at that point in time about veganism. I'm not anymore. So anybody wishing to hunt me down from the vegan community as a turncoat, as a traitor, you could do that. But we try out different identities. We say this. I'm just going to bring it back to our audience. We say this to student teachers about that identity being something that is fluid, is dynamic, is ever changing. We try on those different coats. Am I going to be like my mentor when I come to be a classroom teacher, or are there bits that don't work for me? And digging up those things from our past in order to beat us with a stick just undermines the idea that someone can change and should strive to change and re-examine old views. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And it got me thinking, actually, just back on on my previous entry about a really good Netflix documentary called Pray Away, which explores the pain inflicted by ex-gay ministries that sort of tried to convert. And it centres around people who formerly were part of that movement and part of the harm that was done to those people, and they're really kind of exposing themselves, and many of whom went on TV, and there are interviews with them, multiple interviews with them where they're kind of spouting their views about gay conversion and being able to pray it away, and I've got real sort of respect for them for doing that documentary and coming out and saying, that was me then, this is me now.
I love that idea he puts forward in that article, that we advance by forgetting. We often speak to the candidates, don't we, for the PGC, and sort of say, well, we don't want to impinge on your private life. You've got to have a private life as a teacher. You're a human being. You've got a kind of hinterland, but sometimes you don't want that hinterland to be visible to pupils Googling various versions of your name in a bored 5 minutes so that they can pass things around. And actually, there are services out there that will delete your old tweets or, things like that very simply. And I do think that people should really consider the benefits sometimes of letting the past slide off into obscurity and never be seen again, rather than having, their whole life on display in the present. Yeah,
it's tricky. I mean, it's got me thinking, we won't go down too much of a rabbit hole here, but about Kate Clancy and her book that we've read I read an extract from on this podcast a couple of years back. And, she cut a lot of flack for some of the descriptions of pupils that she taught at the time. But you've since told me that some of those pupils have come out and said, I was that person and I'm okay with it. And she was a cracking teacher.
It was very interesting, wasn't it? Because she did write some things which on reflection are a little bit, if a student teacher was writing that about a student, we'd certainly be hauling them in and throwing the book at them. But you're right. One of the issues was that she'd referred to a girl with almond eyes, and there was an article in one of the papers, I was the girl with the almond eyes, and basically I don't have a problem with it. And I felt it was a very flattering description. Actually Lionel Shriver wrote an article on it as well, in which she tried to get to the bottom of it, and she said, that she was calling out muddled thinking again. She was saying she spoke to a black person and said, well, what is the problem talking about? I think it was chocolate skin, I think she referred to, and the person said, well, it's no, you're comparing this person to food, and you wouldn't do that with a white person, and it kind of, dehumanizes them by comparing them to food. And then she comes back and says, well, what about talking about a peaches and cream complexion? And it was very, very interesting. There was, it was
all played out
really
on Twitter.
one. And it all played out, and some of the longer articles, as we're saying there, were very interesting. I mean, obviously, again, not to say that all that stuff that Kate Clancy said in that book would be something we'd want our student teachers writing, but there was an outrage bandwagon and a lot of people jumped on it, and it got quite noisy, didn't it, for a while?
It really did. But I mean, that whole concept about advancing via forgetting, let's be a bit more forgetful, shall we?
Yes. Let's spend your Christmas forgetting.
Okay, I am a thief.
Oh, Emma Theo.
I know. I shamelessly. I'm going to confess my sins.
You've stolen it off me, is it?
Yeah, but I mean, if we advance by forgetting, then maybe you've forgotten, right. And so I'll get away with it.
I'll forget your thievery in turn. It's fine.
So Patrick Stewart, actor, Sir Patrick Stewart. He wrote an article in, I think, The Observer, but it was in The Guardian, and it was, I think it's a regular feature. You'll probably know, Tom, because you probably read it a bit more regularly than me, but it's a moment that changed me.
Yes, it is a regular feature.
Yes, thank you. Written by Sir Patrick Stewart himself on the teacher who spotted his talent and saved him. And there are a lot of things in this particular article that resonate with me. I'm a big fan of Shakespeare and Shakespeare in education. And I think we've talked a lot on this podcast about social mobility, and I think it speaks to that. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it, and hopefully you will have even more respect for teachers as a result. So Patrick says, I never sat my 11 plus. On the day of the test, I wandered around the hills near the golf club above my hometown of Murfield in West Yorkshire. I ate my lunch sitting against a dry stone wall, looking down on the town where I could see my school pals in the playground during a break in the exams. I doubt if I would have passed anyway. And frankly, I just didn't see myself as a grammar school boy. Had I sat the test, I might never have met Cecil Dormand, a teacher at the secondary modern where I ended up, who would change my life when I was 12 by putting Shakespeare into my hands for the very first time. It was The Merchant of Venice. He gave copies to most of us and told us to look up Act 4, Scene 1, or the famous trial scene, as I was to learn. He cast all the speaking roles and told us to start reading. We all did, but silently. No, you idiots, not to yourselves, he yelled. Out loud, this is a play, not a poem. It's life, it's real. The first words, I have possessed your grace of what I purpose, was the first line of Shakespeare I ever read. I barely understood a word, but I loved the feel of the words and sounds in my mouth. A 400-year-old writer reached out a hand in invitation to me that morning. I felt a sense of an internal, private me being released and connected with something mysterious, alien, and exciting. I was hooked. Cess, as we called him, was my form master and my English teacher. I liked him at once, as did most of the children he taught. His style was very relaxed, funny, and provocative. But when it came to teaching, he was articulate, interesting, engaging, and most of all, passionate. I suspect Cess had already intuited that I loved to escape into the world of fiction and out of my dull, uncomfortable, and sometimes scary home life, living with an abusive father. But he made literature and language feel like a part of our lives too. The same year as he gave us The Merchant of Venice, he cast me in a play with adults, mostly my teachers. I had never acted before. The play was the wartime farce, The Happiest Days of Your Life. I played a young pupil named Hopcroft Minor. There were 100 or more people in the audience, which should have been unnerving and intimidating, but I felt fearless and entirely at home. I felt safe on stage, and I always have since. Perhaps it was because I wasn't being Patrick Stewart, but Hopcroft Minor. Not long afterwards, Sess called me to the headmaster's office where I met another influencer of my youth, Gerald Tyler, the county drama advisor. He told me that the council was going to run an 8-day residential drama course at Calder High School in Mytholmroyd during the Easter break. The head said I could go as a representative of the school. This was where I first had formal acting lessons. Many years later, I learned that Sess must have paid for me to go on the course himself. A few days before I left school, at the age of 15, Sess asked me if I had ever thought of taking up acting as a career. It made me laugh because it was a ridiculous idea, but 2 years later I was offered a place at Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, paid for by a scholarship. Usually the recipients were exclusively Oxbridge students, but they believed I had something that perhaps fitted in with other young people they encountered, although from a very different background. It took me years to find a way to thank Cecil Dormond, but when I did, I was in my first of 12 years as Chancellor of the University of Huddersfield, where I presented him with an honorary degree. A few years later, I made him a second thank you and I invited him to the luncheon celebrating my knighthood, presented by the Queen that same morning. The host invited everyone to say a few words. Sess said, "What the heck am I going to call him now? For decades he called me sir." Sess passed away a few weeks ago at the age of 96. This was written in October. He saved me when I was a boy and my education was failing, and has without doubt been the most significant person in my life. If I had not met Sess, If I had not met Sess, what would have happened to me? I'm so grateful for his belief in me. Rest in peace, sir. Oh gosh, it's an emotional time of year, Tom. I think
you're worn out at the end of term.
Yeah.
Oh, Patrick Stewart. Much though I love hearing you read, I wish that could have been Patrick Stewart reading that, because he has got the best voice in the business.
Hasn't he? So I'm just going to leave that there, otherwise I'm going to end up blubbering.
Yeah, so there's been a lot about teachers, hasn't there? Didn't Adele get a bit of a moment with her ex-teacher on stage in something the other day?
Yes, she did.
Yeah, it's been quite a theme just at the moment, people thanking their teachers. So go off and thank your teachers, folks. It's Christmas and they're all tired.
Yeah. On the brink of tears.
On the brink of just collapsing in a heap. No, it's lovely, isn't it? And Patrick Stewart had a tough upbringing, I think. But
I just like that moment where he says that he really liked the words in his mouth, even though he didn't understand what they meant. And I just think that's whatever helps your kids find their way into a difficult author, difficult concept, then go with it.
Yeah, and that's why we become teachers, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, moving swiftly on to my next thing. Now, this is another. It's not light, but it's for anybody who likes to have a little bit of a deep think about their subject when they're off on a break. You might remember, casting your mind back pre-COVID, we recorded a Christmas episode in which I brought an article by Carl Mayton about semantic gravity and semantic density, and I sat and tried to explain it while the rain hammered down above us.
Oh, gosh.
On the skylight. Do you remember? It practically drowned me out at one point. And I've got another bit by Carl Mayton, which I have been dragging around behind me for about the last year, determined to bring to one of these light episodes, but I've not had quite the right moment. It's become so dog-eared now, I'm just going to bring it. I don't care that my last two articles were heavy. I'm bringing you a chapter by Carl Mayton now, and you can just all deal with it. This is a chapter from his book, Knowledge and Knowers Towards a Realist Sociology of Education. Stick with me. And it's chapter 4 called Knowledge Knower Structures. What's at stake in the two cultures debate, why school music is unpopular, and what unites such diverse issues. It's a big old chapter, so I'm clearly not going to read it to you because we'll be here all night. But he does do some very, very interesting things in the chapter, not least from my own point of view, explain why it is, or put a potential explanation out there for why it is that not many people take music at school. But he also tackles the kind of divide between the sciences and the humanities. And that was actually the bit that I found the most interesting. He tries to do that thing that we talked about when we did the other Mayton article a couple of years ago, which is he takes a thing that you sort of know to be true, but you kind of can't nail it down, and he actually nails it down. So he goes on to kind of explain that, basically kind of boiling it right down, in the sciences, you have a kind of shared thing, which is the scientific culture, the scientific method, the idea that you're looking for kind of facts, the idea that you've got things that you share even between the science disciplines that you all kind of understand, the scientific method and that kind of thing. So he makes the point that science have this strong knowledge structure which underpins the sciences. He also suggests, rightly or wrongly, he suggests that science is a more kind of meritocratic culture where it doesn't matter what kind of person you are, doesn't matter if you're some kind of crazy guy in a shed or somebody rich and powerful. You've got to know your stuff, and you've got to be able to do your scientific method. You've got to have the science knowledge. So it's more about the knowledge than the kind of person you are. He then moves on to talk about the humanities, and he suggests that the humanities don't sort of share concepts and knowledge and language in quite the same way as the sciences. They tend to be seen as quite discrete subjects. He suggests that, he says here, they have a weak grammar, things defined in ethereal, nebulous, even mystical terms, most famously and widely expressed following Matthew Arnold as immersion in the best that has been known and thought in the world. So there we go. That's that best that has been thought and said thing. He's suggesting that that's a little bit of a nebulous concept, that the humanities are a bit hard to nail down in terms of hard facts and knowledge, but that the thing that was hierarchical in the humanities was, back in the past, the sense that you had to be the right kind of person to get a classical education. You had to be rich and white and male and go to Oxford or Cambridge and have good taste. And that was the kind of person who got a classical humanist education way back in the day. And that's kind of the appearance of a more meritocratic society has weakened that hierarchy, and that the humanities haven't been able to fall back on the same sort of knowledge structures that science have. So he's kind of suggesting that's why the sciences feel like they've got a stronger kind of place in the world than the humanities, which can be seen as a little bit wishy-washy. Anyway, he goes on to sort of put all this in some lovely diagrams and ask a bunch of university students what their perceptions are about different subjects. Mm-hmm. In terms of statements like, let me have a look, anyone can do it, nothing special is needed, or you need to learn special skills or knowledge, which would be a kind of sciencey type thing. You need to have natural ability or a feel for it. So, something where you need good taste and inbuilt talent and all of that kind of thing. Or only people with natural ability can learn the special skills needed. So you need the natural talent and being the right kind of person, but you also have to have special skills. So that's like the super difficult one. The elite one. And he kind of plots the different subjects on this quadrant graph where either you have to be the right kind of person and have the talent and the taste, or you just have to have the specialist skills and knowledge, or you have to have both. And it's very interesting that we see things like science and psychology on his graph kind of leaning towards the knowledge being the thing. And we see things like English being, you've got to have the right kind of talent, and music sits right up on both of them. So he's suggesting that the perception of music is you have to be a real elite because you have to have natural talent and taste, but then you also have to learn a load of specialist skills in order to actually do the thing. And he basically suggests that for pupils, this kind of unconscious knowledge of this fact, he's not suggesting they kind of know this consciously, but this subconscious idea that you have to be naturally talented at it and have really good special skills and knowledge, means that basically it's just too much hassle for them for the value of the subject to go through that kind of pain barrier of doing all of those things, and that's why music doesn't get the numbers through the door that some other subjects would. So I would just recommend that chapter as a really interesting one, because it's one where he is actually nailing down where on this sort of two-dimensional continuum different subjects lie, and it's just kind of interesting to think about it if you're a geek like me.
No, it's interesting, and there are lots of sort of potentially damaging consequences if you aren't aware of the problems surrounding those sort of characterizations of the sort of people that are likely to. It got me thinking about options and some of the damaging things that parents, teachers, peers can say about subjects that
sometimes your senior managers, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Can characterize a person and consequently stop them from going down a particular path that might have been the right one for them and might have felt in their gut like something that was for them.
Yeah, and we've been talking about my various doctoral studies and the new curriculum and all of that, and talking about the importance of getting some kind of idea of your subject. And I've been going down the pain cave trying to look at some of these writers on sociology. Carl Mayton is the only one who I can actually understand what he's going on about. Some of the other big names, people like Basil Bernstein, people like Bourdieu, who people throw around when they're talking about sociology of education and stuff. I'm going to put my hand up because it's Christmas and the time for honesty. I haven't got a clue what they're on about. It's almost impossible. But Carl Mayton, I actually can understand what he's on about, and I quite like it, actually.
I quite like it. And what you do so well is that you chew it all down for us and put it across in a way that
I try.
That is clear, which is the mark of a true teacher.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we've been talking about culture and culture wars quite a bit in this.
We have. You've got another one now.
Yeah. Well, it's a podcast, another podcast that is aimed at sort of exposing different sort of examples of how the culture wars began and played out over the years. And it's a John Ronson BBC Radio 4 podcast called Things Fell Apart. Culture wars began in the 70s, apparently, and were a war of values which played out in some instances, which is a particular interest to me, via the school curriculum. So in one episode, Ronson talks to, and I'm quoting Miranda Sawyer's review in The Guardian here, Ronson talks to Alice Moore, a US pastor's wife who manoeuvred herself onto a local schools board in the 1970s because she wasn't happy about the textbooks on the curriculum. And somehow this leads to a Roger McGuff poem, which Moore misinterpreted as being more permissive than it is. And Ronson talks to McGuff and finds out what it was really all about. It's just a really magical moment when, you can see how far something can be misinterpreted. Her campaign, this is Alice Moore's campaign, also led to important black writers being excluded from school libraries, all in the name of protecting children. And I don't know too much about it, but I'm sure I noted a headline this week about Texas, the state of Texas, banning some topics, particularly worrying and troublesome with regard to people from the LGBTQ plus community. So various different topics that are to be banned from school curricula. It was just an interesting podcast, but an interesting point about, again, the choices that we make about school curriculum and what those choices reveal about what we value in a child's education. Yeah,
John Ronson's great, isn't he?
He's a great interviewer. He's got a whiff of he's similar. Reminds me of Louis Theroux. Yeah. He asks some really difficult questions, but in a very
wide-eyed and innocent way.
Yes, exactly. So that's that.
Excellent.
Over to you, Tom.
Okay, it's time to start lightening up a little bit, and I know that we retired our wellbeing slot a little while ago, didn't we, because it was getting a little bit repetitive, but I've got one here that's got a little bit of a link to wellbeing, and Are you tired, Em?
Yeah, really tired.
Me too. I think everybody's tired, aren't they?
I keep saying that it's like when the fuel light comes on the dashboard. It came on about 2 weeks ago, and now I'm trying to drive, metaphorically, very gingerly to try and get myself to the petrol station alive.
Yes, indeed. I would say the same. So I have brought an article from The Guardian by Emma Beddington. It's one of these ones where somebody kind of tries something and reports back as to what it's like. But I quite like this one because she is speaking to somebody called Dr. Sandra Dalton-Smith, who's written a book, the title of which would cause me usually to run a mile from it. Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity. Apparently it's like one of these proper self-help ones. But she was quite taken with this because it divided rest into 7 types of rest. And so I actually read this. It wasn't the article that I thought it was going to end up being. And also, I'm going to stick my hand up and say, I am terrible at having a rest.
You are.
I'm really bad at it. I will just kind of keep going all the time. And then if I have rest forced upon me, as I will over the Christmas period, I just kind of sit there going, all right, I've stopped. Now what? What do I do? I'm very bad at it. I'm not, I'm somebody that could do with an article that lays out some ideas for what rest should actually look like. So I thought I would bring this. Okay. So she starts off with an opening passage in which she basically says that everybody in the world is absolutely tired out because of COVID and stress and that sort of thing. And interviews this person who wrote this book and then goes down this list of these 7 types of rest where she tries all of the 7 types of rest and kind of works out which one she's good at and which one she's rubbish at. So as a public service, I thought I would bring us all the 7 types of rest so that we can actually have a go at some of them over Christmas. So she starts off with the obvious one, physical. She says, Emma Beddington, as a lazy desk-based home worker, I'm rarely physically tired. It's not a problem we'd have as teachers because we're frequently physically tired and mentally tired, but there we go. I do, however, get stiff and achy, sit for far too long and pretzel my body into terrible shapes. So the idea there is to set a phone reminder to, move your neck around, stand up, wander about. And I know you've got one of these Apple Watches, haven't you, that tells you to wander about every 55 minutes or something.
I switched it off because it was just getting a little bit intrusive.
Yeah, but anyway, so get up, wander about, and that can be a tricky one, can't it, sometimes, to remember to get some physical rest from whatever it is you're doing. The second one, mental rest. So she says, mental fatigue, that befuddled, nervy brain fog feeling, forgetting what I was doing and missing important things because my concentration is shot, is my constant companion. Anyone want to...
That's it.
Yeah.
Right there.
Brain like damp Weetabix, a friend calls it, which feels about right.
That's so true. I also liked pretzeling myself into
terrible shapes with your damp Weetabix brain. Yeah. So she says, it's chastening how easy it is to improve my focus with a basic technique. Time spent blocking out low-yield activities such as email and social media and periods of concentration. So there's a good one. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can get in a bunch of emails will come through and that's my day gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
While I deal with low yield and also emails that will take a 30-second response, but then I'll find one from 3 days ago that needed 15 minutes of my thinking time that I haven't answered yet because I haven't found 15 minutes to concentrate on the far more interesting question I've had. So apologies, students, if that's one of you. So the third one she refers to is emotional rest. Emma Beddington says that having taken this online quiz by the author, by far her worst score is for emotional rest. It turns out to be the area she finds hardest to address. She says, one suggestion is to identify people who drain you. As an introvert, I fear that's everyone. Another tip is to risk vulnerability, against which I have an almost physical reaction. My mask is there for a reason. The third is to cease comparison, but comparing myself unfavourably to others is my main hobby. None of these are exactly quick fixes. So, yeah.
Those are really difficult, those last ones there.
Yes.
Were they the last ones? Weetabix brain.
Weetabix brain and, yes, getting drained by people.
Yeah.
I get drained by people, don't I?
Yes.
You've seen me.
Emotional rest is a tricky one, isn't it?
It is tricky. It's possibly a tricky one over Christmas as well, I would suspect.
Yeah.
Since you don't always pick your company over Christmas. The next one is social. I assumed social rest would mean opting out of socialising for a while, but Dalton Smith's social rest means spending time with people with whom you can be your unvarnished self.
Oh, what's your unvarnished self look like, Tom?
My unvarnished self? Well, I think you probably see my least varnished self, but yes, I prefer to keep the varnish on, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yes, it is true, isn't it, that, going out on these social things and playing a part and all that. So that's quite an interesting one. Sensory rest. She says, I know exactly what sensory input exhausts me. Sound. Oh, we should be friends, me and Emma Beddington. All of this is...
You're going to read her book, aren't you? I'm going to buy it for
the
book's
Christmas. by the self-help person that she's...
Oh, damn. See, look, Weetabix brain strikes again.
Brain, yeah, but no, I definitely like reading her columns. She says, almost any noise, the battery bleep from a neighbour's fire alarm, a distant engine, the bathroom fan, can obliterate my focus. While writing that sentence, I told the dog off for licking himself too loudly. So yes, I don't know what sensory input wears you out, Emma, but I'm there with sound, I think.
I don't know. It's probably not sound for me. It's probably visual. I'm sick of the sight of the computer screen. It's definitely not doing me any good.
So down to the last two. Creative rest. So she says, I instantly love Dalton Smith's advice to build sabbaticals into your life, not a month-long writer's retreat. It can be as little as 30 minutes doing something you choose away from the grind. There we go. We keep saying we need a sabbatical, don't we?
Yeah. I don't know whether it's to do anything particularly creative. Maybe that's because my brain is not feeling very creative right now.
Maybe not. And the final one, spiritual rest. At the core of spiritual rest is the feeling we all have of needing to be really seen, of feeling that we belong, that we're accepted, that our life has meaning, which may come through voluntary work or their other activities. And she ends this heavily edited thing that I've read out saying, could I embrace rest purely for myself? I should. This is basic maintenance, not self-indulgence. We can't function forever fueled by adrenaline and caffeine, fogged brains scrabbling to function, nerves frayed like a cheap phone cable. Sure, we can sleep when we're dead, but a little rest before that would be nice.
She's a great writer.
She is a great writer, and I will put my hand up and say I'm the worst person in the world at taking a rest, but goodness me, I could do with one right now.
Do your nerves feel frayed like a cheap phone cable?
My nerves in the last couple of weeks of term have felt frayed to the extent that I've wondered whether I should have my email account taken off me for my own protection so that I don't respond in such a way that I have to spend the whole of the last week of term grovellingly apologising to somebody for ripping their head off. So far, I have succeeded. And how many more days have we got? 3.5 more days to go.
Yeah.
In which I have to remain polite, professional and focused in my emails.
Yeah, just got to keep breathing.
Yes.
Keep that filter, keep that varnish.
Keep your varnish on.
Keep putting those extra layers on.
My email at arm's length.
Yes.
There we go. 7 types of rest for you, Emma. Enjoy them all.
7 types of rest. I shall try to practice all 7 over the Christmas period, although some will be more challenging than others. Right, okay, getting a bit lighter. I'm going to do a plug now for the work, the first novel of my my second supervisor for my Ed D, Professor Steve Blandford, who is also dad to Beth Blandford, who is at Blandoodles, who did our lovely podcast artwork and also did the cover design for Steve's first novel. His first novel is called Yant. That's spelled IANT, and it was released a little bit earlier this year by Cambria Publishing, who are a small press based in West Wales. So, important to support them, and you can currently buy a paperback version direct from Cambria or from the other big massive online book retailer that I'm not going to name just out of spite. So Yant, just to give you a little bit of backstory on this, and these are Steve's words, Yant was partly inspired by the life of my grandfather, who died when I was 2. Only a little is known about him, so most of the book is fiction. Most importantly, the book is about the unluckiest generation in recent memory whose lives began with the outbreak of one world war and ended with another. The novel is partly set in North Wales, the central character's home, and partly around Salonika, where he was sent to fight in a forgotten corner of the First World War. I have just ordered my copy, and one of the ways that I'm going to rest over the Christmas break is to give it a read, and I would recommend that you do too. So Steve, really looking forward to reading it. Yant, everyone.
The multi-talented Blandford family.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay. And as I surface from the original depths that I plumbed with the start of the podcast, I am also going light, but only in the way that I do light, which means it's got a little bit of a satirical edge to it as well. I brought you a podcast as well. I've even got you some audio clips from it, so you may don the headphones that are in front of you, so that you can have a little listen to this. This podcast has been out a little while, and a number of listeners may have come across this already. But it satirises the current love of true crime podcasts, which I know a lot of people really quite like listening to.
Yeah.
And it comes from The Onion, who are an online newspaper, satirical, hilarious spoof newspaper in America. And so they are satirising this particular fashion. I've got 2 clips for us, so I'm just going to set the scene with a little clip from the beginning.
What makes a murder perfect? What elevates a murder from a regular ho-hum killing to a crime so gruesome and compelling that it deserves its own podcast? Does a murder like that even exist? Is it somewhere out there, waiting to be found the next time I open a letter from a convict, or the next time I rest myself out of bed at 2 a.m. to check the Google alert I set for the word decapitated? Or is it just a fantasy, a wild goose chase that will end in nothing but run-of-the-mill kidnappings, dull acts of sexual bondage, or the same old mass murder suicides that say nothing about the fabric of America in the 21st century? Is it all just a beautiful dream? I'm David Pascal, and I've been asking myself these questions for years. For the first time, I finally have some answers.
So David Pascal is a spoof version of all of those East Coast American podcast hosts who like to dig up cold case murder stories and investigate them. He's, a thoroughly mediocre journalist. He's an absolute creep. He's got a massive sense of his own self-importance. He's desperate to win a Pulitzer Prize for a podcast about a murder that speaks about the fabric of America. And this goes on for a number of episodes. He builds a computer called Ethel, the extremely timely homicide locator, in the hope of finding the perfect murder to make a podcast about. There are a number of really interesting little moments there that you almost blink and you miss, like the fact when it's churning out cold case murder cases for him, and then he decides he wants a filter for only female victims, and things like that. He's a thoroughly creepy, horrible kind of person, but it makes some really interesting points about some of the ethics around some of these digging up of these cold cases. So we've just got one more clip to share before we kind of chew this one over, and this is where he finally finds the case that is hopefully going to make his career.
Finally, after years of searching for the perfect murder, a murder that's engrossing and mysterious, a murder that perfectly reflects our nation's current economic and social conditions, a murder that comments on the past and future of intersectional feminism, a murder in which a really hot white girl dies.
Homicide 9924R, Haley Price.
We found Haley Price. Haley Price was a typical 17-year-old with big dreams and clear skin when she was killed. She was a high achiever, a debate champion, a prom queen, a doting girlfriend. But Haley also excelled at being murdered. One chilly Thursday morning in May, Haley was found on the floor of the local bottle cap factory that her father worked at. What's more, she was dead. Haley's case fulfilled every one of the requirements we had plugged into Ethel. It was gruesome. It was unsolved. It commented on the ugly underbelly of the American dream, the decline of manufacturing, modern beauty standards, the gig economy, factory farming, deforestation, saturated fats, the fragility of love, the golden era of television, and CO2 emissions. And most importantly, no one had done a podcast about it yet.
100% match. Retrieving coroner's report.
The coroner's report the Bluff Springs Police Department provided states that Haley Price was shot 3 times in the head. She had multiple stab wounds. She was strangled and smothered with a pillow. She was soaking wet and had clearly been drowned. She had dirt of the same composition found on Mars under her fingernails. She had been dead for 7 hours when her body was found, but her fingernails had been painted 15 minutes ago. She was wearing the class ring of a boy who wasn't her boyfriend Brian, even though he's a great guy and deserves way better. She had scratches on her arms and a bite mark on her leg. She was wearing a shirt that, according to her best friend Alex, was super ugly and not her style at all. Her hair had been cut into a Beatles mop top. So what happened to Haley Price? And how can I get in on it?
There we go. And so off he goes to this small town where he thinks that he's, going to be greeted like a king because he's a podcast producer, and proceeds to try and solve this ridiculous murder mystery. But I enjoy that podcast because it does what I quite enjoy, which is poke fun at something that's extremely fashionable, but it does it while also asking some pretty tough questions, I think, about the current fashion for such things.
Oh, it definitely does. It was making me feel uncomfortable because I think I probably said on this podcast that I was a big fan of Serial, which is the podcast by Sarah Koenig, which tells the story about a murder, a teenage murder, and
Yes, there's definitely that one's in the side. I mean, that was the sort of original one, wasn't it? I think that really got everyone's attention. But I gather, and I must admit, I haven't listened to more. I've listened to that one, but none of the other Serial, but none of the other ones, just because I'm a bit busy. He does do some quite good deflating of some things there, and the sort of ego that's going on, and I suppose that question, which goes all the way back to that Lionel Shriver thing from the beginning, which is, why are these people going in and investigating these cold cases? Is it to get justice for this person, or is it some kind of massive ego trip? I don't know. I'll just leave it to the listener to decide.
I mean, what I like from a sort of arty perspective is the way that he's satirised, particularly that trailer. Yeah. It's the kind of the single notes on the piano.
It's all there.
And it's the intonation and just the way, the grammar of the delivery is spot on. And all I was waiting for him to say was, quote.
Yeah, every cliche is present and correct. The podcast is called A Very Fatal Murder, and you can find it on all the usual podcast places, and it's from Onion Public Radio.
I shall be doing that presently. As soon as we finish this week, I will be downloading episodes. Right. Okay, so I was scraping the barrel a bit as we got to the end. So this is my penultimate entry, and I highly suspect that Tom will squirm to within an inch of his life on this one.
Getting back on me here.
Yeah, I mean, this has very little substance other than the fact that Christmas for me and some members of my family, not all, is a time when we really like to play party games. I know that they're probably Marmite for listeners out there, and I know that last Christmas definitely put the kibosh on party games in person, which are my favourite. I mean, I tried to do it online, but it's never quite the same. On Boxing Days in the Thayer family household, we tend to play all manner of party games and drag the more reticent members of the family into the frivolities, kicking and screaming. They end up having a good time, even if they're putting it on. So I just thought I would share two of my favourites, and I'd ask you, Tom, I know that party games are probably one of your least favourite ways to spend your time.
It's not interesting. We've never spent a Christmas together, and yet you've pretty much nailed me right there. Well done.
I thought I might. I do have a flashback memory of trying to get you to play a similar sort of party game with some of my drama bods, some of my students at the end of the year, and you looked like you wanted to find where the nearest exit was sharpish.
Shrunk backwards into their drapes, and I in the studio. I was trying to camouflage myself in the curtains.
I think so. Okay, so my two top favourites are Articulate, which, for those of you who don't know it, you are given a word or a phrase and you have to communicate it to your team members to guess by saying anything other than the words that are on the card. And it's just a fun game, and there are lots of different permutations of it. We tend to play it in 3 rounds, where you play the first round as I just described. The second round is all the same things that you put into the bowl. You kind of put them in yourselves. You write them on slips of paper, put them into a bowl. First round is like Articulate. Second round, you can only say one word. So it's all the same things coming up again and again, but you can only communicate it in one word. That's obviously not a word that is on the card. And finally, probably your favourite round, Tom, you can only communicate what are on the cards through mime.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's one of my favourite games. And the other one is a game called Werewolf. which I think has various different permutations, different characters, but the basic premise is that people are designated as werewolves in a fictional village or villagers, and there are lots of various other characters that you can distribute amongst the players. There is kind of like a joker character who is the kind of the narrator, the person who that facilitates the game. Everyone goes to sleep at night. The werewolves rise. They choose a victim. They make that clear to the person who's facilitating. They all wake up. Somebody has been killed, and the village, including the werewolves, who are sort of unbeknownst to the rest of the players, they have to decide who they would like to lynch. They're trying to kind of root out the werewolves, it's kind of a big social experiment, really. The person who's facilitating gets to see how people really behave when they're trying to root out werewolves, and fun ensues. So werewolf, play that with your families if you are so inclined, and definitely get the squirmier members of the family on board, because I'm sure they'll end up having a good time in the end.
Yes, that was the one I had to play with your students that time, wasn't
That's
it?
the one.
They
you
didn't
get in
know
flashbacks.
what to make of me because I didn't say very much.
No,
do you remember? They were a bit bemused by me and couldn't work out whether I was a goodie or a baddie or whatever they are in that thing. Yeah, they couldn't work out what to make of me. Oh, well, there we go. Some party games for you to enjoy, listeners, while I shall sit and watch.
And you're not going to share, even if you have anything palatable. What would if you had to, bullet to the head time, gun to the head time even?
I used to quite enjoy playing Pictionary with my kiddies. They're quite good at that.
Hey, I'll take that.
Which is hilarious because I'm very bad at all things visual. I'd much rather not do it visually. But yeah, it's quite a fun game.
Okay, we're going to be playing that one day.
Okay, explain to me this last bit now, Emma.
This is so indulgent.
This is something I don't really understand because I should have done my homework and listened to a podcast and I haven't. Sorry.
This is a real guilty pleasure of mine. And this person, actually, who is the creator or the presenter of this podcast, is a Guardian podcast called Comfort Eating. And it's presented by Grace Dent, who is a food critic. You may have seen her if you watch MasterChef, the UK version. She's often a food critic who gets brought in at kind of high stakes moments in MasterChef, and she critiques the food of the contestants on the show. And I just love her. I unashamedly love Grace Dent. I love the way that she describes food. I love the way that she describes people. She always kind of says it in really kind of straight to the jugular ways, and always has me nodding. But she's kind of got an air of sort of, she's a bit of a rascal, is Grace Dent, and that's what I really like about her. But she really loves food, and I really think that she has found something quite unique. I'm sure she's not the first person to have done it, but the whole premise of this podcast is that she gets famous people on the show. They have to bring for her at the start of the episode, and interestingly during lockdown she got them to send to her their favourite comfort food snack. So she asks, what do you eat when you're home alone? You might not tell, but your favourite celebs will, is the kind of blurb to this podcast. So she asks them to provide their favourite kind of comfort food snack. She has to try it, and she tries it live on air, and one of the kind of criticisms of the podcast is that you can hear mastication as she starts the episode. But there are lots of love. I won't give away too much, but there's a really nice one where Stephen Fry comes in and he provides, I can't remember the name of the fish. Oh gosh.
You told me this the other day.
Yeah, it's not kipper, it's not sardine, not pilchards. It was something I'd never... Skippers.
That's what you said. It. I remember. I was paying attention. Well remembered.
Skippers on toast with tomatoes was his comfort food of choice, and she just describes it, and he's sat in front of the TV and it's dripping, the oil from the Skippers is dripping down his chin, and he just loves it. But what she also does, so after she's done that, she interviews them, but she interviews them through the lens of, you know, what food was in your life? What were you eating at this point in time? And, you know, obviously that brings a lot of kind of hilarity and lightness to the podcast, but it also is very poignant. It's a really interesting episode where she interviews Russell T. Davis, whose partner very sadly died of cancer. And he kind of gave up work for several years when his partner was at the point to which he was needing palliative care. And one of the main things that he was able to give to his partner was food, and was to cook for him. And he talks about that as being a real privilege to be able to do that. So without getting too much into the doldrums, because we've been there in this episode already, we're going to keep it light. I have tasked Tom with bringing for me, and I've done the same, his favourite comfort food snack. So Tom, what have you brought for me?
All right, I got to go and drag this out of the bag now.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to do as Grace does, and describe that I've now been left alone. I must tell you actually and describe that already on the table is an array of of cutlery. We've got quite a few spoons of varying sizes. I can't see any forks. I don't know whether that was just because you couldn't find any, but I can see 2 knives. So I'm already
I've had a rummage in the cutlery section. I mean, this is one ridiculously simple, but it's in 2 parts. And I've brought you a plate as well. That's got a Christmassy plate for you there.
Thank you very much.
So yes, when I was little and growing up, every Sunday, I mean, I guess loads of people would probably do like big Sunday dinners, memories and things like that. We would always have that. But then my mum would always bake bread on a Sunday. So every Sunday tea time was freshly baked bread and, you know, late 80s, early 90s Sunday telly. Of the type that you would watch when you were little.
Now, Grace Dent would interrupt at this point, so I'm going to channel my inner Grace Dent. Describe for me. This is the voice.
What, the bread or the telly?
Describe for me. You wake up, it's the morning. Describe the smell.
Well, there wouldn't be one because she baked it in the afternoon.
Oh, damn it! There we go. The Weetabix brain strikes again. Okay.
Yeah, so yes, the lovely smell of bread would be permeating the house in the afternoons, and then we'd just have bread and stuff on top of bread, like cheese and stuff like that. So it's not very exciting, but the bread was really nice. I have not baked you some bread, Emma, I'm sorry, because I didn't have time. So I just got some bread. From the shop, and I got some cheese and things.
Ooh!
But I thought that was a bit basic, so I thought I'd better get a second sort of angle to this, because if I just said bread and cheese, now clearly I've got very nice memories of the freshly bakedness of the bread, and, you know, the fact it was all lovely and warm, and I'd be sitting in there eating said bread and stuff and watching, you know, terrible studio-bound BBC Sunday night telly type things. So I thought I'd better find another angle, and I would say that one of the other things that links with that, which I like very much, I don't know, how are you with kind of seasonal sort of, you know, do you mind the winter? Do you not like the winter?
I love the
and all
seasons.
That kind of thing?
I'm a fan.
Because some people in the teaching profession kind of don't like it, do they, autumn, winter time, because it means they're at the start of a long academic year and the night's getting dark and all of that kind of thing. I tend to quite like the autumn, even though it's the start of a new year. Actually, because I like my job, so I don't really mind. But one of the things I love about the autumn is the food, the fact that you can make food in the autumn. So I brought some things to go upon the bread and the cheese. Ooh. I have brought some chutney made with plums and green tomatoes and all various bits of fruit and veg and things from my parents' garden. We would tend to make that in the autumn, and that would be very tasty.
Wow, my tummy just rumbled at
rumble
the sight
on mic.
of it.
And I have brought some plum jam from a very good plum tree which sits in the centre of the town where I grew up, where we would snaffle the plums and turn it into jam.
Wow.
So I have brought those things because one of my favourite things about the autumn is all the homemade food, and it's all stuff that you can just chuck on top of a lump of bread and chew it down. I did think about bringing some sloe gin, because that's the other thing you make in the autumn, but I thought drinking something that was 40% while we were trying to record might not be the cleverest move.
Might not, but definitely one day. And I can see, for those of you out there who've never had the privilege of eating Snowdonia cheese.
Oh yes, very tasty.
And is that Black Bomber? Oh my God, it is.
Yes.
It is Black Bomber Snowdonia Company cheese. Snowdonia Cheese Company. I think I'm salivating and I'm losing all cognition now because
'Cause you're
my
staring at the
my
cheese.
stomach is now taking over. As they say, it's the second brain. So yeah, I mean, I love the story. I can't wait to tuck in. Was there a particular choice of bread, type of bread that you went for? Were you particularly picky? Or
well, my mum just used to make it with half white and half brown flour. So it was kind of like brown bread. It would either be a big loaf that you could chop big slices off, or it would be kind of reasonably hefty buns that you could just grab one of and chop in half and fill with yummy things and sit watching your telly.
And did you make a sandwich of this, or was it, you know, and which order did you put the cheese on and the chutney on? I mean, these details are important to great extent.
Well, I think the beauty of comfort food is less detail, more ramming things on bread and stuffing it in your mouth, to be honest.
What would you, so you'd be drinking, what would you have been drinking with this back then?
When I was a kid? Water, boringly. Yeah, I know.
That's a bit Dickensian.
I know. Tap water, brown bread, cheese.
Cheese and
homemade
bread.
goodies.
And beautiful.
Yes, 1980s telly.
Well, we will spare our listeners of the sounds of this because I fear that there is no sound, no nice way of eating
There's
cheese
nothing I can
and bread.
do
It's
in
not
the
gonna sound
edit,
good.
no, to save us from that. But there we go. We can have a little go on that once we've hit the stop button, if you like. So there we go. Sunday night in my house.
I'm there. And was there a log fire?
There was not a log fire. It was a very, very old house. It was a very old townhouse, but no, it just had a gas fire. It's very, very 80s. We had a gas fire and a very small telly. And
what would you be watching on a Sunday night?
Well, I was thinking about this. I dug one of these out for my kids actually, and Rebecca, my oldest one, really enjoyed watching it. There was a production that the BBC did of the Chronicles of Narnia back in the 80s. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Was it cartoon or was it?
No, it was a filmed one, but I was watching it with Rebecca the other day, and it was clearly done in the studio. So obviously we're very used to I think there's a film version of a lot of the Narnia films now, isn't there? And it's absolutely rocking with computer-generated wolves and, special effects a go-go. But this one was very clearly done in the studios at Television Centre with a bunch of kind of BBC Repertory Company people wearing various bits of fur and lots of face paint. And the computer-generated bit is practically non-existent. And it's very creaky and very 80s.
I know the one. It's dark. It's quite dark, isn't it?
It is quite dark. It's got a very nice theme tune with a sort of French horn solo in it.
Yeah.
Went down very well with my kids, strangely enough. But that was a big fixture of Sunday night telly for a long time when I was little.
Oh, and it's got a lovely moment with the Turkish delight in it.
Yes,
hasn't it?
Gloriously hammy BBC rep company Panto White Witch, who really is chewing the scenery so hard. I was quite surprised there was any of it left by the end. She's brilliant. She's properly Panto. Brilliant stuff.
Oh, thank you for that description, because this is it. This is what Grace does. She kind of teases out all of those sensory details so we can be there with you with your comfort food snack. I fear that my snack is going to look significantly lesser in comparison to your lovely bread and Snowdonia Cheese Company Black Bomber. Okay, guilty pleasure expose. You're going to have to describe now, I think.
You're going to surprise me now, or is this going to come as no surprise? We have a bowl.
And this is important, okay? The bowl is important.
Okay, this is good. We have some kind of crisp-like substances. Oh, onion ring crisps. That's very interesting. Do you know they used to sell those at break time in my primary school for 10p? Bacon Crispies. Okay, these are all crunchy snacks of unknown substances made into shapes, listeners. There we go. They're in a bowl. You can just about hear that going round and round in the bowl. Important details.
Okay. Now, the crisps are important. I like corn snacks specifically, with the most dusty flavouriness on them, the better. And they tend to be the supermarket's own brands. Yeah. And I have tried pretty much every supermarket in the UK's own brand of crisps to find my favourites. And Sainsbury's, I'm probably not really allowed to... It's all right,
we're not the BBC, you can give them a name check.
But I am going to give them a name check, yeah. Sainsbury's own brand of bacon, kind of frazzle type crisps and onion rings they're just up there. And so just shamefully, when I get home, particularly on a Friday night from work, when I'm really tired and I really can't be bothered to cook, I do end up either ordering a takeaway or getting my bum into the kitchen and cooking. But the first thing I will do is and it has to be in a bowl. It can't just be out of the bag. It has to be in a bowl because I need to be able to select and eat in order of priority from the least covered in that delicious dust to the most covered in delicious dust. So I save the most, and I get very, very disgruntled if my partner comes in towards the end of said bowl of crisps and eats the best ones that I've been coveting all day.
I assumed the bowl was because, given the state we're in by the end of a week, sometimes in this place, I thought you'd just sort of immerse your face in it. Just lie prone on the floor with your head in the bowl.
No, it's a bit more dainty. It's a little bit more dainty, and I like mixing them up. So I like to give them a good shuffle around. So I've got a mixture. And that with a cold glass of beer. That's the sweet spot for me.
Well, as I said, the onion rings remind me of the strange crisps. I don't know if this was the same for you. In my primary school, you could go and pay 10p for a packet of crisps that you would never see in any shop, only in a school. They came from some unknown place, but onion rings were definitely involved.
Oh, if we were going to get to the absolute pièce de résistance, it would be the beef Space Raiders would be in the mix as well, specifically the beef ones, not the pickled onion ones, the beef ones.
There we go, your love of crisps. You're going to immerse yourselves in those once we've hit the button, are you?
I am going to do just that, and I'm also going to tuck into your veritable feast of cheese and chutneys, bread, delicious bread. So there you have it. Grace Dent comfort eating. I highly, highly recommend.
Lovely. Well, it is time for you to leave us now and go and have your Christmas. Your 7 types of rest, your crisps, your bread and cheese and all the rest of it. And with what little of my voice I have remaining, I will wish you a very Merry Christmas. I wish you a very Merry Christmas as well, Emma.
Yeah, and if there's one present that you can give to us, it's a follow on Twitter at Talk Teaching Pod is our Twitter handle. And even better if you could leave us a little review. That would be a lovely present for us both.
But we wish you preferably.
Yes, a nice one, please. And have a great Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yes, and we'll see you soon. You've been listening to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma Thayer and Tom Breeze. Our grateful thanks and Christmas wishes to everyone who listens to us and everyone who's appeared on the podcast this year. Podcast artwork is by Beth Blandford and the music is by Cameron Stewart. Sorry about the bells, Cameron. We're on Twitter at Talk Teaching Pod, and as ever, we'll be back in a fortnight with something else interesting. Until then, take care, Merry Christmas, and enjoy teaching.